Okay, the first one that we see here is babies killed in Hamas attacks as death toll over 1,200. And I'm not going to start off with that one, but it is just, I think, just nails down the horribleness of this whole incident. And I know there was one Israeli general that was part of the discovery there in that kibbutz that he had over 30 years experience in the military, and he said he was literally sick to his stomach. It is horrific what has gone on there to God's people. The worst, they say, since the Holocaust. What I do want to start off with is the second slide here. This is from Brother Andy Walton. This is a dangerous moment in Israel-Hamas war. And this is from Sky News, October the 13th, so pretty recent. And the article or the news story here says, we might think we've seen it all before. Airstrikes, flattened buildings, funerals, inflamed rhetoric on both sides. But make no mistake, this time is different. And what happens next is hugely important for the region and the world. It is a dangerous moment. Black Saturday, as the Israelis call it, has changed everything, for now at least. Rightly or wrongly, Israeli officials believe the threat this time may become existential. That fear will determine what they do next. That may seem over the top. However horrendous and barbaric, the attacks were limited to one small area, and Israel is a mighty country with powerful friends. But what happened that day has undermined the mystique of Israel's military superiority. Its deterrence is hugely weakened, and that could destabilize the region to the point of much wider conflict. Since its inception, Israel has tried to project strength to survive among neighbors who want to destroy it. But on Saturday, Israeli soldiers were slaughtered in their beds. Videos filmed by Hamas seen across this region show Israelis in uniform begging for mercy or lying dead. And that was the one characteristic of this entire horrific acts of violence, is that they were filmed and distributed across social media. The comment on this is that there is one overriding priority for Israel: to restore the power of its military deterrence. Everything else will be secondary. Its own rules of engagement have changed. It needed something this horrific to make this happen. Zephaniah 2 might be being fulfilled in events we are watching. We read of the day of the Lord's anger. And in that day, Gaza is forsaken and Ashkelon a desolation. Woe to the inhabitants of the seacoast, the land of the Philistines, or the Gaza Strip. They're all destroyed. Zechariah 12, speaks of Israel's nearby enemies being burned up, but Jerusalem remaining secure. We are looking for the inner ring war where all Israel's nearby enemies are totally destroyed. He's quoting from the 6th verse of Zechariah 12, New International Version. On that day, I will make the clans of Judah like a firepot in a woodpile, like a flaming torch among sheaves. They will consume all the surrounding peoples right and left, but Jerusalem will remain intact in her place. And the comment here in the blue font is that Zechariah 12 speaks of quote unquote surrounding or quote unquote nearby or roundabout peoples who are destroyed, and Jerusalem remains intact. This is the inner ring war. This is what Brother Andy Walton and others have termed the inner ring war. The neighboring nations close around Israel, including the Gaza Strip, being involved in this conflict with Israel, possibly before the King of the North comes down. I'm going to go on to the next one I want to look at is one that kind of pairs with the last slide here, which talks about the Russian-Iran axis is fomenting war in the Middle East. And this was from the Daily Telegraph on the 9th. And on the 13th, the Telegraph had another article and it expanded that axis. And I think we'll use that one. It's called The Axis of Evil, Iran, Russia, and China. And and I had to condense this down so much. It's quite it was quite a long article in the Telegraph, and I've condensed. I hope it still makes sense to everyone. There is a de facto axis today, and it is not necessary for these purposes to debate here exactly how evil its component parts may be. All that needs to be understood is that the axis, that is Russia, China, and Iran, shares an overwhelming interest in weakening, indeed supplanting, the West. Putin's Russia wants to rebuild its empire. Xi's China wants to fasten each belt and construct each road until it controls the world. Khomeini's Iran wants to assert itself as the champion of true Islam, defeat the great Satan, that is the United States, and little Satan, which is us, that is the UK, and dominate the Middle East. So far, so far this century, the Axis has watched the West and licked its lips. It has perceived debt, division, decadence, and drift. But the West has not definitively prevailed in these conflicts. Our divisions continue. Our attention span is as short as ever. Our deficits are large, our defenses are small, our energy supplies are still insecure. This remains a good time for the Axis to make trouble. The Hamas massacres were dated to mark the 50th anniversary of the Yom Kippur War. The frenzy of last week's attacks was fanatical but not undisciplined. Arguably, Hamas has a better chance to make trouble this time than did its 1973 predecessors. So the comment we have on that, I think, is it's an important article. And this arena of influence, otherwise known as the three frog spirits, is operating in a very complex world of what the frog spirits were about is finance, politics, and religion. But we need to remember that complexity does not mean uncontrolled. The supreme deity is in full control of all. That does not mean that he supports, doesn't mean he condones, much less causes these horrific events. He has granted the privilege of free will and choice to those created in his likeness. And from the time of Adam and Eve onwards, God views with sadness the terrible choices made by man, but nonetheless allows it and works with it to further his will and his purpose. This triaxis of evil has been remarkably foretold in Scripture to be asserting its ugly head in the time of the end, focusing upon his people before it comes to its decisive end at Christ's return. We quote that Psalm 83. They have said, "Come and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. For they have consulted together with one consent. They are confederate against thee." And so all this might be spoken of as the immediate surrounding nations. We know who those immediate surrounding nations are controlled by, and that is this triaxis of power. And they have one mission that they want to accomplish, and that is the elimination, the destruction of God's people. Hand raised at the Ecclesia Hall. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, Brother Gordon here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you pretty well. It's a little bit in the background, but I think you're coming through pretty plain.
I was just going to mention that Russia and China in many South American countries are trying to set up this alternate financial system, the BRICS. So there's your finance. And as well, they have political alliances to, where they're trying to get signatures where they're gonna protect each other, something like NATO. And as far as religion goes, they're basically kind of all over the place, but there's one common element, and that is that they are the worship of the state is pretty high up there in their religious mind. So, like, they like to put their leaders in, in high regard, and worship of state unity is kind of almost a religion with them.
Yeah, so thanks, Brother Gordon, for that. And we know too that just yes, the BRICS is the kind of the what they're going after, but there's things happening in finance even right at the moment with what's happened here. We see that the oil prices have gone up, which helps Russia and Iran quite a bit with the price they're getting for the oil to avoid the sanctions. And in religion, we see that there's the two sides. The Hamas are basically Sunni, along with Saudi Arabia, whereas Hezbollah and Iran are basically Shiite. So you see the two sides going. There's a lot of complexity involved. Go ahead, Richard Hall, please.
Yeah, Brother Sid here. I just looked up quickly that chapter in Zephaniah that he was quoting from, Zephaniah 2, and it's talking about the Gaza Strip. Gaza shall be forsaken, and Ashkelon the desolation. I'm just not. I just haven't had time to look enough that book of Zephaniah to be sure this is not a prophecy of the coming of Babylon down into that area. But there is one thing that I found interesting, and that's in verse 1 of Zephaniah 2. Gather yourselves together, yea, gather together, O nation not desired. And we were just this week watching a lecture that Andy Walton had given back in 2014. And it was more on the inner ring war and the developments around that, and the development of the Northern Power. And one of the things that he brought out is those people in Gaza right now are also referred to in other prophecy as the tents of Edom. And they were displaced from their area in, I believe it was the Yom Kippur War, and they wound up in camps in Jordan, and Jordan would not allow them to stay, and so they ended up being sent off to the Gaza Strip, and so that would kind of be a good identification of them, O nation without a name that says on the version you've got up there on the screen. This one says, O nation not desired. And it just seems like they're outcasts from everybody. They're not really, they're just refugees. And yet they are refugees that fancy themselves as the descendants of Abraham and the rightful heirs of that land that was given to Abraham by promise. There's only one other entity that has not showed up so far, but it's not very far away from the Gaza Strip. It's in northern Egypt and the Sinai Desert, and it is a group of extreme militant Islamics. They call themselves the Ismaili. So you have there the descendants of Esau and the descendants of Ishmael, who Bible record tells us are intermarried together, all in that same area that is under the fire of the IDF right now. And it's kind of interesting because if the residents of Gaza evacuate and go south, they will be in that country which is occupied by the Ismaili. And they may find a friendly welcome there as long as they're willing to go together with them against Israel.
Yes, thanks, Brother Sid. I think, there's a lot of developments yet that are still ahead on that score, and I think that a lot of things that probably even Israel really hasn't thought far enough ahead yet as to how they're going to govern a Gaza once they have carried out what they intend for it. I think the jury is still out on what Gaza will look like as this after this watershed moment.
Brother Glenn has a comment here too, Brother Ed.
Sure, go ahead, please.
The contrast between the world situation now and the world situation in the 1973 conflict is a point that was made there during this. In 73, that was Richard Nixon was president of the U.S. at the time. Golda Meir was running Israel. And it was quite a different world situation. They had very strong friends. U.S. economy was in pretty good shape, and that made a huge difference in the outcome of that 1973 war. We've got a very fragile economy, a very confused foreign policy, a very confused internal policy in most of Israel's friends right now. This really neat story, kind of what turned the tide of the 73 war, because Syria was coming in from the north, Egypt was coming in from the south, and forgetting now who was coming in from the east. Was Jordan? Yeah, Jordan was coming in from the east, and Israel was being invaded on all three fronts simultaneously and in a very coordinated attack. Golda Meir was prime minister, and Golda Meir, if you read anything of her biography, she was wonderful at getting favors. From the time she was like 16 or 18, she came from Milwaukee in the United States, and she was running like the president of Israeli funding movements at the time. And one thing she always knew how to do was when a donor opened their wallet to make sure she was clear with what Israel needed. And when the 73 war happened, and she had her list of things that Israel needed just to survive, and she called Richard Nixon, and the call went through at something like 3 a.m. Richard Nixon was embroiled in the Watergate scandal. Remember the Watergate scandal? Richard Nixon was the only president, I think, that's been impeached in U.S. history. He was embroiled in the Watergate scandal. He knew he was going to lose the presidency, essentially, and the burning question in his mind was what was the legacy he would leave behind with his time as president, because it's pretty much sure it was coming to an end at that point. And his mother had told him, he was a Presbyterian, his mother had told him, if you ever get the chance, Richard, to do the Jews a favor, make sure you do it. And he was awake at 3 a.m. because he couldn't sleep. And I think he writes in his memoirs that was what was going through his head. And Golda Meir called, the phone call went through, and he just said to her, what can I do to help? And she gave him her list, and he said, we'll give you everything you've asked for. And they airlifted, I forget all the huge list of military, one of the biggest airlifts the U.S. has ever made in history. Straight there, the U.S. was coming out of the 60s economic boom. They hadn't hit the high oil prices, the oil prices of the 70s yet. That kind of happened with the closure of the Suez Canal in that conflict. And so U.S. was very prepared to help, irrationally, actually, prepared to help because of the situation that I'm sure the Angels had brought Nixon into. And so that essentially was the turning point of the 73 invasion of Israel. Certainly see God's hand in that. Fast forward to today, we're in a very different situation. We don't have an American-born Israeli running Israel. We don't have a very cohesive Israel. We don't have a very cohesive America. There's huge support for the Palestinians. They're closing Israeli schools all over North America because of the threat of violence from pro-Palestinian protesters. Just a huge one in Vancouver, 500 people in a pro-Palestinian protest. Even after they've, murdered Israeli babies, the West is still crying that Palestinians should be supported. A much different situation today, and much more likely to go the way that we expect Roxy to go.
Yeah, thanks, Brother Glendon. Yeah, it's very complicated today, and much more so, I think, than, like you say, it's a complex situation, and the U.S. has sent in 2 strike forces, the strike force USS Ford carrier ship, and Eisenhower's on its way. Together, of course, talk about a support, I guess, together, I believe there's around 12,000 military people on those 2 strike forces, 10 ships, and about, I think, around 120 jets or so, jet planes, jet fighters. So, and they're just off, be just off the shore in case they are needed, which I think just shows us just how serious that the nations are taking this, how easily this just could explode into a much greater and wider conflict. On the in front of you here is a map of the kind of the north section of the Gaza Strip, showing the city of Gaza, and just showing where where this nature reserve was here. It was where the 260 people were slain that were at the music festival. And here you have Kfar Aza, where they found the 40 babies, and the Sderot, which is a place that's a lot in the news. Ashkelon is just up on the top of this, and then Ashdod another 40 minutes from that, and then Tel Aviv another 40 minutes or so from that north. And just to show the complexity here, I just bring up a slide I have. I just took this off the TV here this morning. This shows the network of tunnels that Hamas have under Gaza City, just showing how complex a situation it is for whoever it is, Israel or the U.S. send people in to try to help help out with that, and get the hostages out of there. It's going to be not easy to say the very least. And yeah, booby traps are everywhere on there. So I'm just going to go to the last slide if we have time for that. Let's see if I can just bring this up. Oh, this is, well, another thing too, I should just mention, I have on my phone, I have the Red Alert app, which tells of all the, this is what Israelis would see as the rockets come in, or as they get terrorist infiltration or aircraft infiltration. And we can see here, there's Ashdod, and all of these just happen within a minute or so. And even just this morning, I had probably about 30 alarms go off within a couple minutes of rocket attacks and things like that. So it just shows the what these folks are facing there. So I just want to go to the last slide here. Russia can gain from Mideast turmoil, but it could backfire. So here's a slide about Russia. Russia's response to this week's violence in Israel and Gaza has been conspicuously muted as it weighs up its competing alliances and interests in the region. Moscow did not openly condemn the violence meted out on Israel last weekend by Palestinian militant group Hamas, which is backed by its ally Iran, but was wary to alienate its Israeli partners too. Russia stands to benefit from the turmoil in a number of ways, analysts say, given that it distracts and dilutes Western focus on Ukraine. Major oil producer Russia also stands to benefit from a rise in crude prices and amid instability in the Middle East, given that the conflict has the potential to draw in neighboring territories. Samuel Ramani, a geopolitical analyst, says, and I quote, the Russians also see this as an opportunity to act as a diplomatic player in the region. They have already engaged with Lebanon on preventing a spillover of the conflict and the opening of a second front. Russia benefits from a localized and protracted conflict between Israel and Hamas that's confined to Gaza. But if diplomatic efforts fail, there's every chance that the violence could engulf the wider region. That could pose a big challenge for Russia. Russia has military bases in Syria and a lot of people there, a lot of its military personnel there. And Western intelligence strongly suggests it has turned to Iran for weaponry use in Ukraine, which of course the supply of that would be diluted if Iran got into military conflict with Israel. So to many analysts, so-called, these events appear to involve a rather tangled mess of geopolitics, especially in the absence of the true north guidance provided by God to all those who have ears to hear and eyes to see. These entanglements and complexities can get straightened out very quickly in the ensuing polarization that takes place in the aftermath of this initial conflict and violence. The true north polarization results in the revealing of the King of the North coalition as Russia and Ukraine, for that matter, and Russia, you know, occupies Syria, which the original King of the North did. That's the original host nation of the King of the North. And of course, lines up with China, Iran, Iraq, drawing in also Turkey and much of Europe and North Africa, all those against Israel and its King of the South supporting coalition of nations. This past week and that to come could be a watershed event. And, you know, Israel was blindsided by its lack of intelligence or its apathy at the intelligence. So the exhortation of that to us, I think, is don't let us be blindsided by apathy regarding our sources of intelligence, as we have in these current events when we lay them alongside God's word, the greatest source of intelligence. We don't, you know, a lot of them are saying, the analysts are saying now that the reason they were blindsided was the human element that had come in. The intelligence was there in many cases, but it was the human element, the apathy, the thing, you know, the thought that things are just going to go along as they always have. Son of man, Ezekiel says, set thy face toward Gog, the land of Magog, which is, we believe, China and Russia, the prince of Rosh, which is Ukraine, Meshech and Tubal, which are rivers of Russia, and prophesy against him and say, thus saith the Lord God, behold, I am against thee, O Gog, prince of Rosh, Meshech and Tubal, Persia, Cush or Ethiopia, Put or Somalia with them, Gomer, France, and the house of Torgama. All those nations, it all lines up. So we're running out of time here, but we'll take one comment from the Richard Ecclesia.
Brother Gordon, yeah, I read a report that Egypt had warned Israel of this coming onslaught. I don't know how true it was, but that's what they said. The other thing now is I watched a long video about this conflict, and one of the complicating factors is the tunnels. They are very hard to deal with. They said that's how America had such a hard time in Vietnam, because they did the same thing. I'm just thinking the great earthquake that's coming is going to fill all the tunnels in pretty quick.
Thanks, Brother Gordon. And with that comment, I guess we'll have to log out of this part of our class or stop the recording and restart it here for the next part.